The lakeside property, the investment accounts, my entire legacy. The conference room went dead silent, and you could see the color drain from their faces. That's when the real nightmare began for them. I never thought I'd be sitting in a mediator's office at 65 years old, fighting my own nephew over money I'd freely given him. But there I was, across the table from Ryan and his wife Vanessa, watching them lie through their teeth about a $500,000 loan that never existed. Let me back up. Ryan was my sister Margaret's boy. After she passed from cancer 7 years ago, I became something of a father figure to him. He'd call me Uncle Will, ask for advice about everything from job interviews to his relationship troubles. I watched him grow from an awkward college kid into a sharp young man with real business sense. When he came to me 3 years ago with his eyes bright and a business plan in his hands, I was proud. He wanted to start a tech consulting firm. He'd been working in IT for 6 years. Had some clients lined up. Just needed capital to rent office space, hire 2 employees, and cover operating costs for the first year. His projections were solid. The kid had done his homework. I'd sold my manufacturing business 2 years earlier for $8 million. I was comfortable, very comfortable. No kids of my own. My wife Sarah and I never could have children, and she'd passed 5 years back from a stroke. Ryan was the closest thing to a son I had. So when he asked for help, I didn't hesitate. I wrote him a check for $500,000. Not a loan, a gift. I told him that explicitly. I said, Ryan, this is not a loan. You don't owe me a dime. I believe in you, and I want you to succeed. Consider this my investment in your future. He teared up, hugged me, said I was changing his life, that he'd make me proud, that he'd never forget this. I even did more than just cut the check. I introduced him to 3 of my old business contacts, who became his first major clients. I helped him negotiate the lease on his office space. Hell, I co-signed the lease because he didn't have established business credit yet. When he got married to Vanessa 8 months after starting the company, I paid for half their wedding another $30,000. The business took off. Within 18 months, Ryan was pulling in $400,000 a year in revenue. By year 2, he'd hired 6 more people and expanded to a second office. He was making money hand over fist. I was thrilled for him. But I started noticing changes about a year and a half ago. The phone calls became less frequent. He stopped inviting me to family dinners. When I did see him at holidays, Vanessa would barely speak to me, just gave me these cold smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Ryan seemed distracted, always checking his phone, cutting conversations short. I figured he was just busy with the business. Young entrepreneur, growing company, new wife, I understood. I didn't push. Then, 6 months ago, I got served with papers at my front door on a Tuesday morning. A lawsuit. Ryan William Morrison and Vanessa Claire Morrison, plaintiffs, versus William James Hartford, defendant. They were suing me for my lakeside property in Sisters, Oregon, worth about $2 million, and claiming I'd promised them 50% ownership of my investment portfolio, currently sitting at around $3 million. Their claim? That the $500,000 I gave Ryan was actually a loan, and when I refused to give them the property and investment stake I'd promised, I'd breached our oral contract and caused them emotional distress. I read that complaint 3 times, my hands shaking. Emotional distress? I'd given this kid everything. Not just money, my time, my connections, my trust. And this is how he repays me? I called him immediately. He didn't pick up. I called 5 more times over the next 2 days. Nothing. Finally, I drove to his office. The receptionist, a young woman named Amy who I'd met at the wedding, looked uncomfortable when she saw me. She said Ryan was in a meeting. I said I'd wait. She made a call, whispered into the phone, then told me Ryan had asked me to leave and communicate only through attorneys. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I hired a lawyer, Gregory Chen, one of the best civil litigators in Portland. Cost me $500 an hour, but I needed someone who knew what they were doing. Greg reviewed the case and was optimistic. He said, Will, this is straightforward. You have the canceled check with gift written in the memo line. You have no signed loan documents, no promissory note, no repayment schedule. You never asked for repayment in 3 years. This is a frivolous lawsuit, but it wasn't straightforward, because Ryan and Vanessa had hired Marcus Drummond. Marcus Drummond used to be my business partner 23 years ago. We'd started a small manufacturing operation together in the 90s. It failed after 2 years because Marcus made some catastrophically bad decisions, took on debt we couldn't service, made promises to clients we couldn't keep. I bought him out for pennies on the dollar just to salvage what was left. I eventually turned that salvaged operation into the company I sold for $8 million. Marcus held a grudge ever since. We hadn't spoken in 2 decades, but I knew he despised me. And now he was representing my nephew against me. The mediation was mandatory before trial. The mediator was a woman named Judith Crane, supposedly neutral, recommended by the court. We met in a bland conference room at a downtown Portland building, beige walls, fake plants, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Marcus opened strong. He painted me as a manipulative old man who'd lured Ryan into business dependency, then reneged on my promises once the business became successful. He claimed I'd always intended the $500,000 as a loan and had verbally promised Ryan the lakeside property as a retirement gift, plus half my investments to make up for not having children of my own to leave it to. It was complete fiction. But Marcus delivered it with such conviction, such righteous anger, that I saw Judith Crane nodding along. Then Ryan testified. My nephew sat there in his expensive suit, probably cost more than I used to make in a month back when I was starting out, and lied. He said I'd told him the money was a loan as long as you pay me back within 5 years. He said I'd shown him the lakeside property 2 years ago and said, "This will be yours someday, along with half of everything else, since you're like my son." I'd never said anything remotely like that. The lakeside property? I'd bought it last year, a full year after he claimed I'd promised it to him. And I'd never, ever treated that $500,000 as anything but a gift. Vanessa went next. She played the emotional card beautifully, tears streaming down her face. She talked about how much they'd sacrificed to build the business, how they'd relied on my promises, how devastating it was when I suddenly changed my mind and refused to honor my commitments. She was good, I'll give her that. Even Greg looked a little concerned. Then it was my turn. I explained calmly that the money was a gift. I showed the canceled check with gift in the memo line. I explained there was no loan agreement, no promissory note, nothing in writing about the property or investments. Marcus tore into me. "Mr. Hartford," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "isn't it true that you've always had a problem with control? That you used money to manipulate people in your business dealings?" I kept my cool. I said, "No, that's not true. Isn't it true that you forced me out of our partnership years ago and profited off my ideas?" "That's not what happened, Marcus. You know it, and I know it. Answer the question, Mr. Hartford. Yes or no?" Greg objected, said this was irrelevant to the current case. Judith allowed it anyway. Marcus continued, "Mr. Hartford, you're a wealthy man who never had children. Isn't it reasonable that you'd want to provide for your nephew, especially after his mother, your sister, died?" "I did provide for him," I said. "I gave him $500,000 and asked for nothing in return." "But you expected something in return, didn't you? Gratitude? Loyalty? And when Ryan became successful on his own, you resented it. You wanted to remind him who really made him successful. So you created this narrative that everything was a gift, that you owed him nothing more, because you couldn't stand seeing him succeed independently. It was such a twisted version of reality that I actually laughed. Wrong move. Judith frowned at me. She said, "Mr. Hartford, this is serious. Your nephew and his wife are claiming significant emotional harm." "Emotional harm?" I said. "I gave him $500,000 and helped launch his entire career. How is that harmful?" Marcus jumped in. "You gave him the money with strings attached. You made him feel indebted. You used it to control him. And now you're trying to gaslight him into thinking he imagined your promises." I looked at Ryan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The mediation lasted 6 hours. At the end, Judith Crane delivered her recommendation. She said, "While Mr. Hartford's characterization of the $500,000 as a gift appears to have some documentation, the testimony about oral promises regarding the property and investments is credible and concerning. Given the family relationship and the plaintiff's reasonable reliance on what they perceived as promises, I recommend Mr. Hartford settle by transferring the lakeside property to the plaintiffs and paying an additional $100,000 to resolve all claims. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Give them $1.2 million in property plus cash because they claimed I'd made promises I never made? Greg said we should reject the recommendation and go to trial. I agreed. But over the next 2 months, things got worse. Marcus filed motions painting me as having early-stage dementia. Completely false. I'd just had a full physical and cognitive assessment. He subpoenaed my medical records. He deposed my friends, asking them invasive questions about my mental state and whether I'd seemed confused about my promises to Ryan. He deposed my financial advisor, trying to twist a conversation where I'd mentioned maybe setting up a trust for Ryan someday into proof that I'd promised him half my assets. Ryan and Vanessa went on a local podcast about financial abuse by family members and told their story anonymized, but everyone in our social circle knew who they were talking about. I started getting cold shoulders at my golf club. People I'd known for years started avoiding me. The worst part? I started doubting myself. Marcus was that good. He'd created this alternative reality where I was the villain, and he sold it so effectively that sometimes late at night, alone in my house, I wondered if maybe I had said something that Ryan misinterpreted. Maybe I'd been unclear? No, I knew I hadn't. But that's what gaslighting does to you. Trial was set for September. As summer dragged on, I lost 15 pounds. I wasn't sleeping. Greg's bills were piling up. I'd already paid him over $80,000, and we hadn't even gotten to trial yet. Then in July, something happened. I have a niece, Emily, from my brother David's side. She's 35, a high school teacher in Eugene. We'd always been close, though we didn't see each other often since she lived 2 hours away. She called me one evening and said she needed to talk. We met for coffee in Portland. Emily looked nervous. She said, "Uncle Will, I need to tell you something, but I'm scared because Ryan's my cousin and I don't want to cause problems." I told her to tell me. She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots. Text messages between her and Vanessa from 18 months ago before the lawsuit, when Ryan's business was really taking off. Vanessa had texted, "Ryan and I were talking. Your uncle is old and alone. When he dies, everything should go to Ryan, since he's Margaret's son. But we're worried he might give it all to charity, or something stupid. We need to establish that he promised Ryan stuff while he's still alive." Emily had responded, "That seems kind of calculating." Vanessa, "It's not calculating. It's securing our future. Ryan deserves it after everything we'll put him through." Emily, "Put him through?" "Will gave Ryan $500,000. Vanessa, "Exactly. And now Ryan feels obligated to him. That's manipulation. We're just protecting ourselves." I stared at those texts. This had been planned. Long before the lawsuit, they'd been plotting. Emily said, "There's more." She showed me more messages from a year ago, after Vanessa and Ryan had apparently consulted with Marcus Drummond just to explore options. Vanessa to Emily, "Marcus says we have a case if we can prove Will promised more than he delivered. Ryan's pretty sure Will mentioned the lake house once." Emily, "Did he actually promise it?" Vanessa, "Does it matter? It's what Ryan remembers, and honestly, Will should have promised it. He has no one else." I felt sick, but I also felt something else, relief. I wasn't crazy. This was real. They were lying, and now I had proof. Emily said she'd testify. She said she'd felt guilty for months about staying silent but was afraid of family drama. When she heard about the trial, she knew she had to speak up. I hugged her. I told Greg immediately. He said the texts were admissible as admissions by a party opponent. This changed everything. We also subpoenaed Ryan's business email account as part of discovery. Greg's paralegal found something interesting buried in an archive folder. An email exchange between Ryan and Vanessa from 3 years ago, right after I'd given him the money. Ryan had written, "Got the check from Uncle Will today. $500K. He said it's a gift, no strings attached." Vanessa had replied, Amazing. We should keep him happy, so maybe there's more where that came from. Ryan. I feel bad, though. He's doing this because he cares about me. Vanessa. And you'll care about him, too. Just make sure he knows how grateful you are. Build the relationship. You never know what else he might give us down the road. These emails proved they knew it was a gift. They proved the entire loan narrative was fabricated later. But we still had a problem. Marcus was good, and he'd find a way to spin this. He'd claim Ryan had misremembered, or that I'd changed the terms later, or something. We needed more. Greg hired a forensic accountant to review Ryan's business records. What she found was stunning. Ryan's company was doing well. Very well. But he'd also been siphoning money into a personal account. Nothing illegal, just aggressive about taking distributions. In the last year alone, he'd pulled out $1.8 million in profits. The accountant also found that Vanessa had purchased a vacation condo in Bend, Oregon, for $750,000 in her name only, using cash from Ryan's distributions. They weren't hurting for money. This lawsuit wasn't about need. It was pure greed. Greg built our defense around 3 pillars. The documentary evidence that it was a gift, Emily's testimony about Vanessa's texts, showing premeditation, and the financial records showing they weren't victims, but opportunists. Trial started on a Tuesday in September. The courtroom was modern, wood paneling and high ceilings. Judge Patricia Moss, presiding, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for being no-nonsense. Marcus gave his opening statement. He was eloquent as always, painting Ryan as the victim of an overbearing uncle who gave with one hand and took with the other. He emphasized the family relationship and the trust that had been betrayed. Greg's opening was different. He was quiet, methodical. He simply said, "This case is about 2 people who decided that a $500,000 gift wasn't enough. The evidence will show that they always knew it was a gift, and they fabricated this lawsuit to extort more money from a man whose only crime was being generous." Ryan testified first for the plaintiffs. He repeated his story about the loan, about my promises. He was coached well, he spoke softly, seemed reluctant, like he didn't want to be there. On cross-examination, Greg destroyed him. "Mr. Morrison, you've testified that your uncle told you the $500,000 was a loan, correct?" "Yes." "Do you have any written loan agreement?" "No, it was verbal." "Do you have any promissory note?" "No." "Any repayment schedule?" "No. We were going to figure that out later." "I see. And in 3 years, did you ever make a single payment toward this alleged loan?" Ryan hesitated. "No, because he never asked for one. He never asked for payment on a loan. We had an understanding." "Right, an understanding. Mr. Morrison, I'm showing you Plaintiff's Exhibit 12, the canceled check for $500,000. What does it say in the memo line? It says gift. Gift, not loan. Correct?" "Well, he wrote that, but verbally he told me." "Yes or no, Mr. Morrison? Does it say loan or does it say gift?" "Gift." Greg pulled up the email Ryan had sent Vanessa 3 years ago. "Mr. Morrison, do you recognize this email?" Ryan went pale. Yes. Can you read the highlighted portion for the court?" Ryan's voice was barely audible. "Got the check from Uncle Will today. $500K. He said it's a gift. No strings attached." "No strings attached." Those were your words, correct? "Yes, but..." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." Vanessa was next. She cried during her direct examination, talked about how much stress this had caused, how they just wanted what was rightfully theirs. Greg was gentler with her on cross, but just as effective. "Mrs. Morrison, you've testified about the emotional harm this has caused your family, correct?" "Yes," she sniffed. "And you purchased a $750,000 vacation condo in Bend last year, correct?" She blinked. "Yes, but that's not relevant. It's a yes or no question, Mrs. Morrison. You purchased it for cash, correct?" "Yes." "So, while you were planning this lawsuit against Mr. Hartford, claiming financial harm and reliance on his promises, you had $750,000 to spend on a vacation property?" She didn't have a good answer for that. Then Emily took the stand. She was nervous but solid. She testified about the text messages, about Vanessa's admission that they were trying to establish promises, about the calculation behind the whole thing. Marcus tried to discredit her on cross, suggested she was biased in my favor. But the texts spoke for themselves. Judith Crane's recommendation had been based on credible testimony about my promises. Now it was clear that testimony was fabricated. Finally, I took the stand. Marcus came at me hard. He tried to make me angry, tried to trip me up. He asked about my relationship with Ryan, about my motives for helping him, about whether I felt resentful of his success. I answered every question calmly. I said I loved Ryan like a son. I said I was proud of his success. I said the money was always a gift, because I wanted him to succeed without the burden of debt. Then Marcus asked, "Mr. Hartford, isn't it true that you're a lonely old man who tried to buy your nephew's affection?" I paused. I looked at Ryan, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. Then I looked at the judge. I said, "Your Honor, may I answer that question fully?" Judge Moss nodded. I turned to face Marcus. "I'm not lonely. I have a good life. I have friends. I have my health. I have my memories of my wife and my sister. What I don't have is patience for people who mistake kindness for weakness. I gave Ryan that money because I loved him and believed in him. I didn't expect anything in return except honesty. Not gratitude, not loyalty, just honesty. And he couldn't even give me that." The courtroom was silent. I continued, "I have bank statements showing every dollar I gave him. I have emails proving he knew it was a gift. I have testimony from his own wife showing they planned this lawsuit 18 months before filing it. I have financial records showing they're not victims, they're opportunists. And I have 3 years of documentation showing I never once asked for repayment, because you don't ask for repayment on a gift." I took a breath. "So no, Mr. Drummond, I'm not a lonely old man trying to buy affection. I'm a person who made the mistake of trusting someone who saw my generosity as weakness. But I'm also someone who documents everything, keeps every receipt, saves every email. Because in business, I learned a long time ago that memory is fallible, but paper doesn't lie." Marcus tried to object, said I was making a speech. Judge Moss overruled him. She wanted to hear what I had to say. I looked at Ryan one more time. "I loved you like a son. I would have given you anything you needed. All you had to do was ask. Instead, you lied to my face and dragged me through hell for money you didn't even need. I hope whatever you thought you'd gain was worth what you've lost." When I finished, you could have heard a pin drop. The trial lasted 3 more days, but the outcome was clear. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. They found in my favor on every count. Not only did they reject Ryan and Vanessa's claims, but they awarded me $125,000 in attorney's fees for defending against a frivolous lawsuit. Judge Moss also took the unusual step of issuing a statement from the bench. She said, "This court finds that the plaintiffs knowingly fabricated their claims, engaged in bad faith litigation tactics, and wasted judicial resources. The evidence of premeditation is particularly troubling. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated attempt at extortion." Ryan and Vanessa left the courtroom without looking at me. Marcus Drummond packed up his briefcase in silence. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. But the story didn't end there. About a month after the trial, I got a call from a reporter at the Oregonian. She'd heard about the case and wanted to do a story on financial exploitation within families. I agreed to talk, using it as a chance to warn others. The article ran with the headline, "When Generosity Becomes a Weapon, Portland Man Fights Nephew's Lawsuit, Over $500,000 Gift." It detailed the case, including the text messages and emails. It went viral locally. I started getting emails and calls from other people, mostly elderly folks who'd had similar experiences. Adult children or relatives demanding money, threatening lawsuits, using emotional manipulation. One woman, 72 years old, told me her son had sued her for her house, claiming she'd promised it to him. She couldn't afford a good lawyer and ended up settling, losing her home of 40 years. Another man said his daughter had taken out credit cards in his name and ruined his credit. When he tried to report it, she threatened to sue him for elder abuse, claiming he was mentally unfit. These stories broke my heart. I talked to Greg about it. I said, there should be resources for people in these situations. Legal help, education about documenting gifts, support groups. Greg said, you should start something. So I did. I used part of the money I'd set aside for retirement and created the Hartford Family Protection Foundation. We provide free legal consultations to seniors dealing with financial exploitation by family members. We hold seminars on asset protection, documentation, and recognizing manipulation. We've helped over 200 families in the last year. Emily joined the board. She said it was her way of making up for staying silent for so long, though I told her she had nothing to make up for. As for Ryan and Vanessa, I heard through the grapevine that their marriage fell apart about 6 months after the trial. The stress of losing, the public embarrassment from the article, the damage to Ryan's business reputation, it all took a toll. Ryan's consulting firm lost several clients who didn't want to be associated with someone who'd sued his own uncle. His revenue dropped by 40% in a year. Vanessa apparently left him and moved to California with a new boyfriend. Took half of everything in the divorce, including half the vacation condo. I didn't take any pleasure in their misfortune. I'd meant what I said in court. I'd loved Ryan like a son. What hurt wasn't the money or the lawsuit. It was the betrayal. It was the realization that someone I'd trusted had looked at my kindness and seen an opportunity to exploit. But I also learned something important. Documentation isn't paranoia. It's wisdom. When you give money to family, even people you love and trust, put it in writing. Make it clear whether it's a gift or a loan. Keep records, not because you expect betrayal, but because clarity prevents misunderstandings. And if betrayal does come, stand your ground. Don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking your memory is wrong or your generosity was manipulation. The truth is the truth, and paper doesn't lie. I'm 66 now. I spend my mornings working on the foundation, my afternoons on the golf course, and my evenings having dinner with Emily and her family. I bought a boat and spend weekends at the lake house, the one Ryan wanted so badly. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about what we could have had. A real relationship, family dinners, me teaching his future kids to fish off my dock, all the things money can't buy. He chose $500,000 he'd already received and property he was never promised over a relationship with someone who genuinely cared about him. And for what? He lost the lawsuit, lost his wife, damaged his business, and lost me. I would have given him the world. All he had to do was not lie to me. But that's the thing about greed. It makes you believe you deserve more than you've been given. It makes you willing to destroy relationships for money. And it blinds you to the fact that what you're chasing is worth far less than what you're throwing away. I don't hate Ryan. I pity him. Because he'll spend the rest of his life knowing he had someone in his corner. Someone who believed in him. And he threw it away for a lawsuit he never should have filed. As for me, I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. The foundation gives me purpose. Emily and her kids give me family. And I sleep well at night knowing I told the truth, kept my integrity, and didn't let anyone rewrite history. Marcus Drummond sent me a letter 6 months ago. Just one line. You were right about the partnership. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late. I keep that letter in my desk drawer, though. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. People will always show you who they are, eventually. Your job is to believe them and to make sure you've kept good records when they do.